Hey everybody, this is Maury from AS Solar. Today we're going to be talking about our portable power kits. We've had a lot of interest in these. You can pick these up and hook them up, and you'll have power in your bunkie, in your boathouse, wherever you need it, even on your RV. So the system we'll be showing you today is our larger unit. This is going to have a 1500 watt inverter. We also sell a smaller kit for 600 watts, smaller panel, you provide your own battery, etc. So to start with, we're going to introduce all the parts. So to start with, any solar power product is going to have a solar panel. In this particular case, we have a full-size panel. Full size means it's about 1 meter wide and about 1.5 meters tall. This is pretty typical of any modern panel. This particular model puts out 250 watts. That's pretty average these days. Depending on the kit you'll be getting, anywhere from 240 to 255 watts is common. To get this power into a usable form, there's a couple of different products that we use. The first one is this. This is called a charge controller, and it takes the power out of your solar panel and converts it into a form for your battery. With the system that we're using here, which is known as Blue Sky, this is a California product, it's tuned for up to 300 watts. So it's basically one of these controllers for every panel in the system. In our case, only one panel, so one controller. The Blue Sky is packaged separately with a little box. We won't be using the boxes to make our life easier. It comes packaged separately because this is wired up using these small screw terminals on the back. We'll be showing you how to do this in just a minute. Next up is the inverter. In this particular case, this is our mid-size kit. So this is a 1500 watt inverter. We've powered all sorts of things off of this, small fridges, pumps, etc. This is pretty good for just about any use you can imagine in a small, in a bunkhouse for instance. You could power all your lights, television, electronics, and even a little beer fridge. Just make sure it's an Energy Star model. It does make a difference. So in this case we're using a Samlex. This is a pure sine wave model, which means it's not going to be noisy. You won't have any radio interference. And additionally, they run cooler. This particular model is designed to be self-cooling for most of its life. It's got a big aluminum case. That's why you can notice I'm sort of holding it here. It's got a bit of heft to it, and that's because the actual case is a gigantic block of aluminum, acts as its own heat sink. So again, we'll be showing you how to hook this up in just a moment. And last but not least, of course, is your battery. Now, with all of our portable power kits, you supply your own battery. In this particular case, we're using a hefty one, which is kind of the model that we suggest with the larger kits, the 1500. This has what they call 200 amp hours. This will run a fridge for about a day and a half, 2 days without sun, maybe even more depending on the model. It'll run all your lights and electronics for days on end. With a lot of power. It's also a pretty hefty battery, which is why I'm not picking this up to show it to you. Again, we'll show you how to wire this up as part of the process. And the last part, of course, last but not least, are the cables that are going to be used to hook everything together. Your kit's going to come with 2 out of the 3 cables you need. One of the bits of cable is right here. We call these whips. These go from the solar panel, which have these funny connectors on the end, to the charge controller. It's one of the 2 cables. Second cable, again, depending on the model of your inverter, will come with a very hefty set of battery cables like these. Our kits come with a built-in fuse to make sure you don't run too much current through. Very handy. So that will also come with your kit. And the last bit of cable you have to supply yourself. And this goes from the charge controller to the battery. The reason we don't supply it is because we don't know how far it's going to be going. In my case, I just had some 10 gauge solar wire, which is great outdoor stuff, so I'm just going to use 2 small lengths of that. Any old cable will do. 10 gauge you can get anywhere, 12 gauge will work just as well. So that's it. And you're only going to need 2 tools to put this whole kit together. Any old adjustable wrench, and that will be used on our battery because there's screw down terminals on your battery, no matter what kind you have. And a small Phillips screwdriver, and this is for simply tightening down the terminals on the charge controller. So those 2 tools, make sure you got them, that's all you're going to need. So we're going to start with the easiest part of the installation. I have my charge controller, my Phillips screwdriver, and the whips. Now we're going to get in close and hope that the camera catches this. But there's not much to it, so you can even just listen and you'll understand what I'm doing here. On the back of the charge controller are these 4 small screw-down terminals. They're labeled, might not show up on the camera, but there's 2 connectors for the battery, and there's 2 connectors for PV, which is for the photovoltaic panel. These are the solar panel connectors. So there's a plus and a minus. This is your plus. It's the one with the barrel on the end, hard to miss. sometimes colored red wire just to make things a little bit easier. Hooking these up, nothing to it. Unscrew the terminal as far as it goes. Take your connector, hope you can see all this, and simply insert it under the metal screw. This does not have to be anything too pretty. Once you tighten the screw down, there'll be excellent contact. So I have the connector under the screw terminal. There's a little metal plate there that you put it under, and then simply screw it down. Make sure it's good and tight. That's all there is to it. You'll notice it holds onto it pretty well, so you can let go at this point. Now we're going to do the other connector, the negative. Same thing. Straighten out my wires there. Get it under the terminal. Again, you don't have to be super accurate. And tighten it down. And that's all there is to it. So the charge controller is quite small. As you can see, it's about the size of my hand. And it can be positioned anywhere as long as it's clear of water. You don't want rain or water splashing onto the charge controller. You can put this inside, outside, anywhere you want. Doesn't generate a lot of heat. And there's not a lot of power flowing through this. A maximum 300 watts, which is a couple of light bulbs. So now we'll show you how to hook it up to the panel. Now the reason that we supply these little whip cables is because your solar panel is going to come with very similar connectors. And you can't find these in an average store. These are called MC4s. They're used on practically every solar panel in the world these days. They make life easy because they just snap together. So after attaching the whips to my charge controller right here, it really becomes quite a simple affair. I'm just going to let it hang. They snap together. There's only one way to do it, and that's it. There's really not much to it. So now we have our charge controller attached to our panel. The lights won't come on until we have a battery, but that's about it. That's how it's going to look once that's done. All right, so let's move on to the battery. So I've taken the inverter out of the box. We're going to hook the inverter to the battery. So we'll have the solar panel, the charge controller, and inverter to battery. That'll mean that our last step will just be connecting the charge controller to the battery, at which point we're finished. So let's start with our inverter. This is the 1500 watt model. Comes with these little plastic covers. Just pop them off, nothing to it. Take your battery cable. This is really not rocket science. There's a red and a black. Simply going to hook the cables together. These are normal hex screws. And there's a lock washer, which keeps everything from moving around. Cable simply goes onto the terminal, lock washer on top, and for now you can just friction fit these. We'll give them a tighten down later. There's our negative. And now for our positive. Oops. And try not to lose any of the parts while you're doing this. There we go. And then you can put the plastic clips back on top if you like. It does tend to keep things a little bit neater. There's tiny little screws if you want to hold the plastic caps. I don't bother. They tend to stay where they're put. And that's about it for the inverter side. Now I want to just show you on the other side of the cable. The cables that we supply with our kits come with a built-in fusing system. And that's to go up against the battery. That's to make sure that you don't put too much charge into, or much more likely, take too much charge out of the battery. Which might happen if the cables got cut, for instance, or there was a short circuit. The fuse will protect you. Nothing else in the system is very high power. It's the only part that has to be protected. So whenever you're talking to a battery, you always hook the black up first. So I'm just unscrewing by hand the negative connection here. The connectors that come with your battery kit will fit almost any battery out there, except for a traditional automotive battery, which we don't recommend you use with your kit. If anything, a really good battery to get is a marine battery, and although those will have the automotive plug terminals, they'll also come with a converter that has a bolt just like this. So one way or the other, you're going to need a bolt-like connector. If your battery doesn't come with one, you can always buy one at any automotive store, like Princess Auto has them, for instance, and they're quite inexpensive. All right, last but not least, of course, you always hook up your active wire last. This one has the fuse to protect it. So here we go. This one's a little tight, but there we go. All right, that's it. Now at this point your inverter's powered. If you don't want to hook up the solar system right now, that's fine. You can use the system like this. You have a 1500 watt inverter system ready to go. You can always test it out by flicking the switch, and I've got power. All right, last step, we're going to hook the charge controller right over here to the battery. It goes onto the same terminals. There's nothing fancy about this. All right, so we have our charge controller wired to our panel using the whips. We have our inverter wired to our battery using the supplied battery cables. All that's left is to wire the charge controller to the battery using wires that you'll supply. Okay, this is very easy. All you need is your screwdriver. Back off the terminals. In this case I have two different colored wires, just to make my life a little bit easier. Always start with the negative. Slip it under the terminal. Now I'm using 10 gauge, so you got to push it in a bit. But it will fit. There's lots of room. Tighten it down. And that's that. And now the positive cable. Again, just get it under that terminal. Not a lot of power here, so you're safe to handle this. And that's it for this end. Last step, connect it to the battery. We'll see you over there. Last step, we're going to attach the cables from the charge controller onto the battery. One simple place to do this is between the terminal that comes on your battery cable and the washer that'll be on your battery. If you don't have a washer, it's probably a good idea to get yourself one. It takes a little bit of dexterity to get the cable in between the two, but not that much. Tighten her down by hand as much as you can. And this is where you need your adjustable wrench. Finish it off with a couple of turns. Doesn't have to be too tight. You're not squishing the cable down. Just making sure that the wires aren't going to come loose. Good enough for that one. On to our last wire. Again, a little bit difficult sometimes to get it around the terminal. The washer will tend to move around, which is what you're seeing right now. There we go. Hook it on. Just make sure the cable's nicely tucked behind the screw. Tighten her down. A little bit of room to play with here. And another turn on to do it. There we go. All right, the moment of truth. We've got our panel. I've had to move things here to make everything closer so you can see it once. I got our panel going to the charge controller, which is right behind it right now. Charge controller is coming out through the two 10 gauge cables into the battery, from the battery into the inverter, and then from the inverter to the only thing that I had that I could plug in and show, little coffee maker here. So here we go, and sure enough, we've got solar powered coffee. So that's it. That's our portable power kit. I hope you've enjoyed this. As always, if you've got any questions, feel free to email or call us. The kit's available up on our webpage. Check for any deals, sales before you purchase. Thanks a lot for watching.